In this session, we are going to discuss the very important aspect of buyer identification. In the previous session, we spoke about the background of the SPX, the purpose, and why the SPX has been successful over the last 25 years. The topic that we are going to talk about today is obviously absolutely crucial, because in this SPX program, we are totally dependent on buyers and opportunities. We can actually say opportunities and buyers, because if we don't have buyers, there are no opportunities, and that will mean that the program cannot progress. So let us look at the outline. Publicizing the program. Number one, we must tell the buyers and the suppliers about the program. Analyzing the buyer community to prioritize the buyers. We have to prioritize buyers. We can't just run into the market and try and find buyers all over the place. We must qualify our buyers. Engaging with the buyers. After we've identified buyers, we then engage with our buyers and we talk to them about the possibilities of finding them suppliers, telling them about the SPX program, then recording and tracking the opportunities. If you have these opportunities, if you identify opportunities, we have to track them, and what we usually use is a pipeline. We call it an opportunity pipeline, and that's a broad list of possible opportunities that could be looked into and that one could investigate. Now, publicizing the program is the first point of the advantages of the procurement context. Now, the procurement context is very broad. It is almost a science in itself. In the business fraternity, in the business world, the industrial fraternity, in the industrial world, that is the pivot around which all matchmaking, contracting, doing business is actually surrounded. That is absolute pivotal for, and all of those, the contracting, the business, it hinges around the context within procurement, and it changes. Procurement does change, the procurement policies change, and we of course have heard a lot about strategic sourcing, which is a very, very important and a crucial driver of all procurement and of business success. If business and industry do not adhere to the newest and the latest rules on procurement, then obviously they will lag. Now, strategic sourcing will be something that will be discussed at a later stage. Governments are increasingly driving strategic sourcing, and that is obviously also why we are saying that strategic sourcing is a crucial driver of business success. And if we remember that one of our major stakeholders in the SPX and in this program is government. The next point which we will be looking at is the procurement. It has to be within the context of demand leveling. Demand leveling is a new concept to a certain extent. It is relatively new in many countries, but it is something that has been in the workplace, in the industry. It has been a principle that has been adhered to in industry for quite a long time. Now, in essence, what it means is to look at the future and what the future holds regarding the demand for products and for which products. As an example, in South Africa, government has embarked on a program which they call strategic sourcing, and it is also designation. They call it designation. Now, designation is actually products that have emerged from industry, and industry has put them forward and made a case and put a proposal forward to government to say this product is something that our country needs, and it needs to be protected in the sense that it has to be protected to be made locally, and that the increased localization is of the essence. In the proposal, it is very, very certain that they must be quite clear that there is going to be an offtake. And that offtake will be determined by the strategies that are being put in place now. So that product, or the products that have been designated, have gone through a rigid process of demand, it's demand leveling, but it's looking ahead in what the demand would be necessary. So yes, long-term projections and sourcing plans are of absolute crucial importance. Now, I've just spoken about the designation of products. It's not in all countries, and localization is a very important aspect. Localization in many countries is a driver of the local economies, and therefore the designation of products have come into being. Now, designation, the word designation, as we said, is really effectively focusing on certain products, commodities, systems, and components which will in the future be of big demand. And government has to play a role in that, and it's mostly the case. Localization is most countries' priority. The value addition to resources. We take countries where you have, for instance, raw materials and natural resources. To add value to these natural resources, localization, manufacturing localization. We must be very clear here. We're talking about manufacturing localization. Because what we're trying to do is to add the value within the countries where the materials are and the raw materials are. It may even be so, and we know that some of the components or some of the raw or the materials or the basic materials may be imported to a country. But as long as it's being made in the country, in that country, that it could be called, and it obviously will then be seen as localization. There is also an aspect that to be made out, and that is regarding local content, but that is something that every country and every SPX must decide on how they define these aspects. In other words, localization have two legs. It's local content, and then also the other one will be the local spend. Spend is increasingly aligned with government industrial development plans. Now, we know that most countries have industrial development plans. The one aspect of the SPX, and also one of the most important reasons for that legitimization, which we spoke about in the previous session, most of that emanates from this aspect of governments being very, very strict and stringent on any developments in that country, manufacturing or whatever it may be, to be in line with the government's strategic direction. That it would not make sense for industry to move into a direction that is not in line with the government's development plans. And that touches also on the localization aspect. We can't have foreign manufacturing only. There will always be an aspect, or there will always be a percentage of imports, but we want through the SPX, and I want to emphasize that the SPX is very, very important for export, for import replacements. Excuse me. Procurement environment is becoming more strategic. The procurement environment, we talk about the procurement environment, it actually latches onto what we've said, and that is, for instance, if big companies, big state-owned enterprises, government spend has become very strategic, and it's become more intelligent in a certain sense, where it has to link on and latch on to the relevant needs of industry, of buyers, of suppliers, of the different levels of the procurement sectors and the government. Now, marketing the SPX program as government in certain countries, and most countries, are the sourcing of funding and the upkeep of the SPX is done by government. Government is the major stakeholder. Government is usually the main funder, and they are the custodians of the program. And government, if the SPX is part of a government's strategy or part of a government's extension in what they do, then the marketing would be logical through the government and through its media. The government-owned companies, as we mentioned, for instance, in certain countries where the infrastructure belongs to the government, or the government has a stake in that enterprise, then that is also indirect government intervention on the marketing. Large corporations have huge spend. They spend a lot of money on huge projects in governments and in countries, or for governments in countries, for semi-government organizations. Now, large corporations have a huge stake in finding the right suppliers. And we all know that where localization has become a very important aspect for a country, that large corporations have obligations. Those obligations are absolutely very strictly monitored by the government. And they have to adhere to those obligations. And if we talk about the obligations, specifically on localization obligations, so what they source, what they buy, has to be a percentage obligation, will have to be localized, or localization targets on content and spend. Private companies, the smaller ones, most of them OEMs. As I just wanted to go back to the previous bullet point, the large corporations, a lot of them have probably 5, 6, 7, one shouldn't even mention a number, but they have more than, they've got a number of OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, where the large corporations usually are the main contractors, they subcontract OEMs, and those OEMs have to and they have to link to the government's obligations for localization. Private companies, they are usually OEMs. They have to also do that, and they are a marketing channel because the private companies need suppliers. And where can they get suppliers? They can get suppliers through the SPX. If the SPX is strong and the SPX is doing its work, then the SPX is a major source for them, and therefore they will market the SPX program. It can be attempted via, and this is really not rocket science. All of you listening to what we're saying here will know what all the various channels are, the media, which can be used, newsletters through the media, print, electronic, radio. The other is the government departments' press releases. Very, very important because the government is a major stakeholder, and with press releases, obviously, state-owned companies. As we said, I would like to. We're talking a lot about state-owned companies, but just to reiterate, a state-owned company, for instance, could be the railways of that company, of that country. It could be the harbors, the harbor equipment. So a big spend. Countries have quite a number of state-owned companies that are semi-owned by government, but they run as own entities. And these state-owned enterprises also have obligations for localization because they are big spenders. Billions of rands, in many cases, trillions of rands of spend. Agencies communication, well, we have agencies, there are research and development agencies who have a stake, who gain by the SPX program in the sense that they also are exposed to buyers, suppliers, matchmaking, and business which is taking place, and the spin-offs from that business, on all that business that is generated, is to their advantage. Success stories is a very important marketing tool, and one of the things that the SPX should do at all times, and which they do, is to publicize success stories internally, externally, to government, to all their stakeholders. Analyzing the buyer community and to prioritize buyers. Now, as we said earlier, to identify buyers is the crucial part of the SPX program. Now we're just going a step further. We're going slightly further and we're saying, well, let's prioritize these buyers. And how do we do that? The buyer fraternity, different sectors and levels of the supply chain. We've been mentioning, but a number of levels. We've been mentioning a number of buyer sectors, but the state-owned procurement, direct, indirect. Government also buys. Governments buy directly. So they are a buyer for the SPX. Not for the SPX, but where the SPX can work and where they can have their interventions and where they can assist. Now, large national projects, that's where government, and this is more indirect, where government has big spend projects, where they build dams, or where they build a number of telescopes, or where they build infrastructure. So where they spend on large projects, like for instance, something that is also becoming more and more important is the green energy, alternative energy, wind, solar, and a lot of governments are spending a lot of money on these projects. Now, it's important that in this process, and this is not, we don't want to, I want to emphasize this, I don't want to make anybody afraid of this, but it's not so easy, it's not a very easy process, but one has to, when doing this, going through this process, with buyers and prioritizing buyers, one must be very clear on what a first tier OEM, second tier, third tier, and beyond, what those tiers are, what their roles are, and what is the type of product that they are supplying, and how they actually fit into the whole scheme of things, and how do they all link. Now, I can briefly say, as most of you probably know, OEM is linked to a contractor, a main contractor. A main contractor needn't be an OEM. It could be a large international corporation. It could be a consortium of people. It could be landowners. It could be, there are many different types of contractors. You had the main contractor, and in many cases your state-owned enterprises are also main contractors. They have then OEMs who they select on a tendering process to do the work, and those OEMs then select their sub-suppliers from tier 2, 3 and down. Other means of identifying opportunities, subcontracting fairs, for instance, Midest in France, which is a very, very important one, workshops with procurement departments of large organizations. Now, workshops, brainstorming sessions, get-togethers are underestimated in many instances. In many cases, this is not utilized enough. Personal, well, not personal, but direct interaction with your stakeholders is important. And in many cases, SPX has a major role to play to bring buyers and suppliers together, not only on the formal side as we were talking, but also on the informal side, and to bring them together so that there can be interaction and that the people can actually network. They get to know each other, they know the process, and it is quite important that there is a space for that type of interaction also. I would say a more indirect, or not indirect, but maybe a more informal interactions which should be facilitated by the SPX, and it works. It really works. The management information system, in a later module we will talk about that. I'm not going to spend much time on that. That's the MIS, which has now come online with Unido, and it is very exciting. The ins and outs are not very known at the moment. It's still being tested, but on the MIS, Management Information System, also has, that's also a channel whereby the SPX can be promoted. Informal gatherings, that's total informal gatherings like breakfasts, where you get a few people around the table, or you have a small little function. We're not going to go into too much detail. Press conference is very important. We know the press is a major role player in disseminating information, and it is vital. The notification of tenders, to analyze tenders, to prioritize efforts, and identifying opportunities. Tenders, the whole tender process is, in many cases, very, very, very intricate process. And the important thing for SPX is to know where to find those tenders. Because in fact, the first place to be able to identify your contractors is where the tenders have been awarded, and those people that have been awarded the tenders, in many instances the OEMs, or it could be the main contractors, those are the people that the SPX should target to go and see them, to interact with them, and to find out what their obligations are, for instance, on localization, what their needs are, and then to engage with them, which we will see in the next session, where we will be going into more detail in engaging with buyers and to get the suppliers lined up for the buyers. Now, with tenders, the tender bulletins, there are very many tender bulletins. There are also a myriad of web-based tender notification systems, information systems, which costs or which is sold to the consumer. But those are really very valuable and worthwhile. Industry media, press releases, the internet, newspapers, and company and state-owned company communication measures or media. There is a lot of communication going on externally and internally with these companies and the state-owned enterprises. And then there are also others which we can think about and which will be given through to you on the content and the study guide. Engaging with the buyers, we must ascertain the supply chain. Main contractor, OEM, first-tier supplier. We must know, as we said earlier, at which level is the buyer. The sanctioning of engagements with OEMs. This is quite important, that in many instances, the state-owned companies or the main contractors would like the SPX to get sanctioning, well, not really sanctioning, but to work through them to get to the OEMs so that there is harmonization in communication, so that they know that SPX is going to their OEMs or to their suppliers with the right message and that they are all talking from the same page. It is really just to coordinate the communication. Visits to main contractors, candidate OEMs and buyers, yes, visits absolutely important. For instance, the opportunity development expert in the SPX, his main role is to sniff out, if I can call it that, and to find the OEMs, the main contractors, and meet with them to ascertain what their needs are so that you can prepare yourself to find them the right suppliers and in the right way. And sell the SPX value proposition to the buyers. In many cases, yes, not in many cases, at all cases, when you go and see the buyers, you must do a selling job. That is crucial. Tell them what the advantage of the SPX intervention is for them. In cases where the SPX is not mature yet, where it's still developing in a country, we know there are challenges, because one of the big important aspects of the SPX is how big their profiling database is. And the further down the line the SPX has gone, the more people and more companies have been profiled, and more people are on the profiling database. The more people on that profiling database, the more value add there is to any buyer. a broader buyer interaction, info sessions, workshops, which we've spoken about as well in this context, in this case, is as important as in the previous scenario. Then I would like to actually end off the session by just alluding to the recording and tracking of opportunities. Each SPX has the freedom, I believe, to design, to devise, to develop their own tool, their own way or methodology or whatever you may call it. It could be a tool or a methodology to track, to record first, and then to track progress and to track opportunities. The important thing about that is if you have a list of 64, for instance, and this is coming from a real example, 64 opportunity clusters, if you can call it that. That would be a list of broad opportunities. It could be a sector. And in this case, it's not normally a specific product or a component. It is a broad, a wide opportunity. It could be a project which is in the pipeline, which government is planning, or it could be a project in the pipeline which a state-owned enterprise or company is planning. For instance, to build 8,000 motorized coaches for passenger transport. So that would be a broad opportunity, and some of them could be in the making, some of them could be imminent, some of them could be could fall off the list. So it is a broad, just a basis of what the broader opportunities are. I'm still looking for a word for that, because not in our context, not really an opportunity in the true sense of the word. It is a potential something which can be pursued and which could realize into opportunities. I would like to say, yes, before I say that, in general, it is important to continually record emerging opportunities and to stay informed of progress, new opportunities and disappearing ones. Because some of them, as I said, fall off the list. Some of them are projects that have already commenced, which did not have obligations, which did not know about the SPX intervention, and which went on and continued outside of the UNIDO process or the SPX process. That is also realities that we must face. That happens. And then we must be very, very diligent in constantly recording and looking at the progresses. Are there more of these bigger, larger, broader opportunities? And we put them on we call it a pipeline. It's a pipeline of opportunities which illustrates or which gives you basic information. It's usually the opportunity cluster or the projects that are in the pipeline, and then it just gives a bit of information on who the buyers or which sector it is, and also it gives some indication of the development in that field, the development, how the timelines. It gives you it maps out. I would almost say it maps out an opportunity environment or landscape. the opportunity pipeline, the tracking tool, which I've just mentioned. This tool indicates the following: opportunity identified and investigated buyers, number of the opportunities, and requests for information generated. That is really what it broadly gives you. This tool will be in the study guide, and it will also be available and accessible on the website. So it is a tool which we in South Africa use extensively. Gives us a good idea of the progress, where we're going, what's going on out in the market, because one must have a bird's eye view. And I believe that SPX is very, very important that we have a bird's eye view of the landscape of opportunities in that country or in the country. Buyer identification as the end of our show. Thank you very much.